Um, in Iraq, 2008, I had just got promoted to Sergeant First Class. Prior to deployment, I had been in the same unit for years, so I knew the majority of the soldiers in the unit. I had a female soldier who I knew her from the time she was a private. She had just made sergeant, and we did a random health and welfare inspection. When we initially knocked on the door, on the door to the CHU, and she answered the door, I asked her, I said, you all right? Because I looked at her and she didn't look right. So initially she was like, Roger, Sergeant. I was E7, Sergeant First Class. Roger, Sergeant Craft, I'm good. I was like, okay. I said, well, we're doing the health and welfare. And she was like, oh, excuse me. But she was like, oh, crap. Oh. I was like, okay, well, I had my battle buddy, Staff Sergeant Dunham, Sergeant First Class Dunham with me. We were doing two-man teams. We entered her room. There was another NCO, male NCO in her room that wasn't her husband. It was like 2 a.m. So number one, he shouldn't have been in her room. Number two, as she walked and she appeared intoxicated. And I was just like, are y'all serious? I'm sitting there, I'm like, are you serious? And she said, well, oh well. I said, and I asked her, I said, have you been drinking? She's like, oh, yeah. She said, am I going to get in trouble? She says, I have a bottle. And she told me where the bottle of alcohol was. And I'm sitting there, I'm looking, I'm like, you really must be drunk, you know what I mean? To even tell me this. And I'm assuming that she thought because we were friends that it was going to be okay. However, I looked at her and I told her, I said, sorry, you are wrong. And you know you're wrong. She said, Roger, sir, I know I am, but it is what it is. Found a brand new sergeant that I knew, forever, who had recently married. Her husband was on the road at the time. He was out the gate, out the wire, and she had a male in her room. And now on top of that, she had been drinking. And here I am with a soldier or a NCO who was, her and her husband were both my friends. So it's like, for me, it was a very much of a moral dilemma. What do I do? Because I could have easily said, hey, you need to lay down, go to bed, get this guy out your room and left it alone.
Hi folks, this is Matt Sergeant Kuntz. The video you just saw, we saw Sergeant Croft go into a building, go into a Chewy's doing a health and welfare inspection, and presented himself or was presented in a very awkward situation. Some of the questions we're going to talk about when we meet up online, uh, the questions you need to prepare to answer is what happened in that video? What were some things that you saw that might not have been noticed or identified by anybody else? In this situation, what would you have done? There are a plethora of different scenarios that we can draw out just from the limited amount of information that we have. So we want to just kind of get a feel from all of you, what would you have done? And then finally, why is doing the right thing so hard? Sergeant Croft had a very big decision to make, and there's several things that he would have done. What would you have done? And what would have been the wrong answer? That's another question that we want to ask. This is S302, the ethical leader. And S302, we're going to talk about how, as a leader, you are responsible for discussing ethical issues in the workplace and enforcing these ethical standards. We also want to make sure that we're welcoming subordinates to come to you with these ethical issues and what that takes. In this lesson, we're going to analyze the ethical reasoning process as well as character and ethics. As a result, you're going to have the ability to effectively identify ethical problems and create courses of action to solve these problems. The intent of this is to be able to train, lead, and conduct operations at the platoon level. This lesson is supported by DLC 303 and DLC 411, the ethical problem solving model and the nature of adherence to the Army ethics and support. This is our TLO. We're going to analyze ethical reasoning processes. We're going to do it online and in the classroom as you come to phase 2. We're going to do this in accordance with ADP 6-22 and FM 5-22. We are going to have some handouts, some learning activities, and obviously the multimedia resources. As we go through this topic, we need to better understand the difference between character and ethics, right? And some of the questions that we're going to ask when we talk about character and ethics is, what does the ethical leader in your organization look like, and how does character influence that ethical conduct, right? Because it does. It all starts with the character of the individual. And then from there, if we have the character and we have the ethics, what part does SHARP, the Army values, empathy, warrior ethos, service ethos, and discipline, how do they influence ethical conduct? And how do you develop the character of your soldiers, right? To be an ethical leader, this requires more than just merely knowing the Army values, right? Leaders must be able to live by them and find moral solutions in a diverse problem. Ethical reasoning must occur in everything leaders do, in the planning, preparing, executing, and assessing any operation. The character portion of that is comprised of a person's moral and ethical qualities. This helps determine what is right and gives a leader motivation to do what is appropriate regardless of the circumstances or the consequences. Army leaders must embody these values and inspire others to do the same. Now, every member of the Army has taken some sort of oath or some sort of Army oath. And what we have to ask ourselves is, does that oath play a part in our character and in our ethics, right? So we have to remember that Army professionals volunteer and take this solemn oath to bear truth, faith, and allegiance to the Constitution and to protect the freedom it defines. The Army values of loyalty clearly reflect that fact, and allegiance actually allegiance means your willing obedience to that lawful order. Army professionals must demonstrate true faith by leading by example, doing their duty and taking action to uphold the moral principles of the Army ethic, and rejecting orders in violation of law. This is the meaning of honorable service. So when we meet up online, the questions that we're going to talk is how does allegiance to the Constitution and the oath of enlistment actually play into your ethics or into any ethical conduct? And what oaths have you committed to personally outside of the Army? It might be a Hippocratic oath. It might be an oath that you took as a police officer, as a teacher. What other oaths have you taken? And we're going to discuss that when we meet up online. So now that we talked about character and oaths, let's talk a little bit about ethical problems and what an ethical problem looks like, right? When, as a leader, we have to understand that there's different unethical and ethical behaviors that we need to be able to identify. What does an unethical behavior look like? And some of those behaviors can be an abuse of position, can be fraud, conspiracy, bribery, can be improper compensation, conflict of interest, sexual harassment, academic misconduct such as plagiarism or cheating. The one thing we have to remember is values and beliefs create a foundation of ethical conduct, and adhering to the Army values is essential to upholding high ethical standards and behavior. Any unethical behavior quickly destroys the organization's morale and cohesion, and it determines the trust. It undermines the trust and the confidence essential to teamwork and mission accomplishment. And any of these unethical things that happen, and we've seen it in our ranks, right? The minute that it's overlooked or nothing's done to it or nothing's done about it, it does nothing but toxify the situation. Some of the questions that we're going to ask when we come back online is how do you identify some of these ethical rights or wrongs, right? What guided you to actually looking at what was ethical or what you saw was not ethical and did something about it? What kind of unethical behaviors do leaders face today? And what are some that you have faced, just like the first question asked? And then finally, how do leaders use their position in influencing soldiers in an ethical manner? And that one's a tough one. What do you have to do? And it's the easy answer to that is just show them what right looks like. Well, in many cases, what right looks like might not look right to them. So we need to make sure that we identify to our soldiers what that looks like and why that comes. Ultimately, what we have to keep thinking about is that true professionals are guided by an ethic that establishes the personnel and institutional standards expected of its members. A professional ethic creates a shared professional identity and provides an enduring set of moral principles, values, and beliefs that guide that profession as it provides its specialized service to our society. Now, before we go on to solving ethical problems, we keep talking about the Army values, the Army values, the Army values. I will tell you, as a young Boy Scout, our values were very simple. A Boy Scout was trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And I've remembered that for, I'm going to date myself, but some 40 years since I was in Boy Scouts, right? It's been a long time. the Army values are such the same way. And if we remember, they spell out leadership. So it's loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage in those Army values. And every member of the Army must lead by these values, and they really kind of work with each other. And these Army values actually lead into solving ethical problems, right? The Army values are our compass needle. They're always pointed towards what the nation demands of its Army. To be an ethical leader, this requires more than just merely knowing the Army leader values. We must be able to live these values every day. Ethical choices may not obviously be between right and wrong. So when we solve ethical leaders, or ethical issues or ethical problems, we must use multiple perspectives to think about the ethical concerns, applying them, and determining the most ethical choice. Under no circumstances should leaders intentionally issue vague or ambiguous orders or instructions to avoid responsibility or accountability. That, in many ways, is how leaders get away from ethical issues, because they give orders that are extraordinarily vague, that can um, offer leeway of what that ethical decision could be, right? And that's where we have to put in that ethical reasoning. And that ethical reasoning is just that, is giving an ethical decision to solve and determining the wrong or the right, or the positive that come from that ethical situation. And again, that all goes back to the Army values. These values and beliefs create a foundation for ethical conduct. Adhering to the values is essential in upholding high ethical standards of behavior. Any unethical behavior quickly destroys our morale and our cohesion. And we kind of talked about that, right? So when we're thinking about these ethical problems, and we're going one way or the other with these ethical problems, we have to understand that we're intentionally putting things in place that make the right decision possible all the time. There should not be a vague misunderstanding of how they're, because the consequences are huge. If we push something under the rug, the consequences of those actions are much more substantial than not fixing the problem up front.
I was a instructor for a academy approximately 10 years ago. Had one of my students, a female student, throughout the duration of the course, flirtatious innuendos, body language, nothing physical, just stuff that was going on. The class was, it was myself and I had a partner instructor. I approached him and asked him if he was getting the same thing, and he said no. So that led me to believe that it was just occurring to myself. At the end of the 30-day class, there was a statement that was made that led me to believe that I had a decision to make whether to act on her or not.
So the video you just saw was First Sergeant Godden. He was an instructor at the time, and he had an ethical decision that he made. And we're going to talk about this online. So it's essential if you get a chance, go back and look at that video a couple of times. And there's there's a lot of stuff that's vague in that video. I get it. But the questions that you want to ask yourself or be able to or be prepared to talk about is what specific behavior or statement in this scenario helped the first sergeant identify or their character and their ethics in this situation, right? And how did that go towards honorable service? How did the actions of the individual show lack of competence, character, and commitment to the Army profession? So when we're talking about this, the individual, we're not talking about the first sergeant, we're talking about the student in this situation. So how did the student demonstrate or show lack of those things? And then finally, what moral characteristics were determined or ignored by First Sergeant Godden when he decided what to do? Make sure you jot down your answers because we are going to talk about these online.
Some people might ask why I didn't report it, or why I didn't go down one road or the other road. I'm an old-fashioned kind of guy. I was raised in the South. I have my own individual morals, my own individual values that I was raised on. At the time I was married, and then at the time being in the Army for 10 years, using the Army values assisted in making the decision that I made, which was not to act on anything that was given my way. I didn't report it. One, I didn't really feel the need to. I didn't feel assaulted. I didn't feel harassed. And me being at the time, an older guy, and the student being young, I guess you could say, somewhat flattered. But I don't think there was really a need to report it, just due to the fact that I myself didn't feel violated in any way, I guess I would say. At the end upon graduation, nothing ever happened. This individual that I'm discussing went back to her home station. I remained an instructor at the location that I was at and continued my career.
So in the second video, we got a little bit more information about First Sergeant Godkin's course of action, right? And as we look through the video was quite clear that he just didn't identify it as a serious situation. He didn't feel threatened, anything like that. Now, when we come together, we're going to discuss these 4 questions. And the first one, when the first sergeant said, I have my own individual morals, my own individual values, why is it important for Army professionals to uphold those morals and values at all times? The second one, if he had not been married, do you think he would have reacted the same? Why or why not? When he said, number 3, when he said using the Army values assisted in making this decision, do you feel that by using the Army values, the decision was easier to make? Why or why not? And then finally, if the female soldier made an inappropriate comment, why did he not file the report? If he did not wish to file a report, what other courses of action should the first sergeant have taken? And then, do you think First Sergeant Godden made the right decision not to file the report? Why or why not? And we're going to talk about that as well when we meet up online. So when we meet up online and we talk about Army ethics, we are going to make sure that we answer these questions, and these will be part of your review questions as well. So you should have done this. The first one, when it asks, how will you use your ethical reasoning process as a leader? What are some things that you're going to do personally to build some sort of ethical reasoning process? How will you assess the character of your soldiers as leaders? That's a tough one, right? The easy answer is by doing counseling, by doing mentoring, by talking to them, but dig into it a little bit deeper, right? How will you assess their character, right? How will you be able to identify what they're doing and whether it's right or wrong? How do ethics influence your role as a leader? That one's always easy to, or an easy one, but dive into it as well about, what are some ethical things you have dealt with and what you had to do as a leader, and how are you now going to move forward and better identify ethical issues and ethical things? What are some ideas, or what are some things that help you identify what these are? Folks, again, this is a summary of Army ethics. We analyzed ethical reasoning processes, and we're going to talk more about that when we get together. We talked about the difference between character and ethics and how character plays a huge role in that. We talked about ethical problems and ethical problem solving, and finally, again, ethical reasoning and solving the ethical problems. Again, this is S302, the ethical leader. I am Mass Sergeant Coates. We will talk more about this when we meet up online.